Hello, everyone, and welcome to this live stream brought to you by us at ICEERS, the International Center for Ethnobotanical Research and Education. And I'm here today with the team from the Ayahuasca Defense Fund, Constanza Sanchez, Natalia Raboyo, and Jesus Alonso Olamendi. We're going to talk to you a little bit today and just share some trends of what's going on the ground with legal cases related to different plants, from ayahuasca to others as well that are included in our program. So a lot of things are happening on the ground, and it's really important to us to be able to share with the community what we're learning. So to get started, just going to take us back in history a little ways. And Constanza, you've been with the Ayahuasca Defense Fund for the longest time. Can you share a little bit about how it got started, the story behind it, and the origins of the Ayahuasca Defense Fund?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Andrea, and thank you everyone for joining us this evening here in Spain and morning perhaps where you are. So welcome, and yes, just to start with providing a little bit of historical context about how all this started. As you probably know, as ICERS was founded in 2009, 2009, and since the very beginning, we started to receive requests from facing legal challenges in relation with psychoactive plants. As you also probably know, psychoactive plants has different legal status all over the world, but the most common situation, and that's the case of ayahuasca, is that ayahuasca itself is not scheduled, but DMT containing ayahuasca is. And that has led to many law enforcement all over the world and drug policies all over the world to criminalize and prosecute activities or any connections with plants. So that, as I was saying, since the very beginning of ICEERS functioning, we received requests of support from people facing these legal challenges. And we started to develop somehow, with our resources at that moment, with our knowledge at this moment, started to develop a more and more sophisticated way of supporting these cases. At the very beginning, it was not very professionalized, but since very soon we realized that these cases were increasing, so we had to professionalize and incorporate new people to the team, incorporate more knowledge and resources, and that we had a very important case in Chile, and even Benjamin de Lunen and Jose Carlos Bozo, our executive director and scientific director at ICEERS, they traveled to Chile. They attended the cases. Jose Carlos provided expert witness testimony in court, and that ended up in a very good result for the people involved. And even Benjamin produced a documentary on that case. It's called Ayahuasca Reframe, that you can find in our webpage and networks, social networks. And from there, and with the coming of the ayahuasca conference in 2014 in Ibiza, we organized a meeting with experts and people working in from one side in drug policy reform and also in legal issues. So we organized this meeting with lawyers from different parts of the world, with drug policy experts from different parts of the world, and we started to define a more, let's say, professionalized strategy to build this support service, and to offer the community options to be more protected in legal terms, and to to have or to be supported in the case of facing a legal incident. So I think, yeah, this is, I don't know, Andrea, if you would add something like
Yeah, I think maybe just to add that after my understanding, after that 2014 World Ayahuasca Conference in Ibiza, one of the critical factors of getting the Ayahuasca Defense Fund started was that we launched a crowdfunding campaign, and the community basically backed the idea, backed the formation of the Ayahuasca Defense Fund, and really supported us to continue to doing this work. So it's always been a program that has been community funded, which I think is really important. So just welcome everyone who's just slowly joining us. I'm here with the members of the Ayahuasca Defense Fund team, and I'm Andrea Langlois from ICEERS. And I'm going to go next to Natalia. We're going to go through a round of questions, and then we'll open to any questions you have around legal issues or legal incidents. I see some comments coming up already, so we will get to those after we just get a bit of details and overarching statements from our team to lay the groundwork for the conversation. So Natalia, I know that you've been a lawyer, one of the lawyers on the ground with the Ayahuasca Defense Fund for a number of years now. Can you describe a bit about what kind of supports the ADF provides to the community, and a little bit about our criteria for accessing that support?
Yes, and as you said, because the ADF is a community kind of based hub of information as well, and it's it's the community who provides the financial resources that we need to continue with our work. We always need to have a criteria to know who do we support. So in that sense, what we look at is the best practices of our practitioners in the first place. Like, we want to make sure that what we're supporting are kind of the best practices, or somehow like an umbrella of what are the persons that we are supporting, right? The second thing is integrity, looking at how the work goes on, how they look at safety, reciprocity, of course, giving back to the source, and kind of looking at the self-regulation. We all know what the best practices are, so we kind of foster that, and we support those cases in particular. The support that we've given in the past is always kind of sharing past sentences that we have, precedents, information, arguments as well. So we sometimes look at the national strategies. I must say that each country has different strategies that we look depending on the national framework and what are the components that we can play with. So sometimes it has to do with religious freedom. Sometimes it's another human right, maybe cultural rights. If it's an indigenous person, we look at indigenous rights, and so on and so forth. So we kind of share these arguments, and also we do share all the pharmacological arguments as well, which I must say are crucial for winning cases. As Constanza, pointed out, it's ayahuasca. It's not illegal under national or domestic legislation, but it is DMT, what is normally scheduled. So we kind of look at making a difference between the DMT that it's in the vegetal world and the DMT that is scheduled, versus the scheduling of ayahuasca. As we know, some countries have actually scheduled ayahuasca as a vegetal substance. So we share all this information, and sometimes, especially Constanza and Boso, have gone to court as experts in doing some reports on these issues, the legal part and the scientific aspect of ayahuasca.
Great. It's a great overview. Thank you, Natalia. I'm going to go over to Jesus now, who is the newest member of our team. Unfortunately, we've seen a growth in the number of cases and had to expand our team. But unfortunately, we got Jesus joining. And I'm just curious that since you've joined, what are your impressions of doing legal support on the ground with these kinds of cases?
Well, thank you, Andrea. Personally, I think it's a blessing to put my knowledge to the service of many of these plants. Also, I am deeply grateful to be in an organization that is completely aligned with debunking some myths around many of the plants that have psychoactive substances through legal, human rights, through scientific research. And I think that's something that I'm really proud of. So I know times are a bit difficult right now with many cases going all around the globe, but I'm deeply grateful to be part of this organization. And also, yeah. So now, and I know we're going to get into the details afterwards, but for me right now, there's a current situation in Mexico which compromises me even more, right? Um, this of course is something that we're working towards, clarifying many of this misconceptions that many authorities have, not only in Mexico but in the rest of the world. And I think part of the work that the ADF does is not only providing legal counseling or legal support, but also being a little bit more proactive, right? Having more proactive strategies in order to prevent any legal challenges that people who facilitate many of these medicines could face. So yeah, for me, it's an honor.
Thank you, Jesus. So, Natalia, I know we probably get this question often. We're called the Ayahuasca Defense Fund, but our work goes beyond that. Can you maybe speak to, what kinds of cases you see around different plant medicines?
Yes, and this is also a thing that sometimes our community gets confused, as it's, the name is Ayahuasca Defense Fund. They tend to believe that we only defend cases related with ayahuasca, but as you said, it's wider, and it has to do with all plant medicines. But so of course, the first plant that gets caught in the nets is ayahuasca, and the second place is coca leaf, then San Pedro, and mushrooms. So in that order. So we've defended, a large amount of cases around these plants in general. Sometimes we get some cases with the bufo alvarios and with iboga, but I would say those are the least.
Great. So we're gonna pop up a map now, so people can see the cases that we've seen over the last year. And maybe Jesus or Natalia, whichever you feel would like to speak to this overview of the legal cases that we've seen in 2022.
Yes, well, I just want to point out that normally in the past, we would see legal cases almost in Europe and in the US. So that is what would be like the Ayahuasca Defense Fund would be concentrated in these countries, because of course the medicines would travel abroad and would be, getting the cuts of prohibition in the nets of prohibition in Europe in general. But recently we've seen a trend, as you can see, in the Americas, not only in the United States, but also, as Jesus already pointed out, there's a huge amount of cases in Mexico at the moment, which is quite delicate. Then we've seen some incidents, not escalating to legal cases, but in Costa Rica. Then, of course, we've had recently cases in Brazil related to the exportation of ayahuasca, Argentina with bufo alvarius, and then Chile. So now the ADF is working not only in Europe, but also working very hard in the Americas as well.
Wow, those are some surprising trends. And how many cases, Natalia, has the ADF seen since it started?
Well, until today, it's 283 cases in 44 countries. So we also see how the ADF has been, obliged to look into the broader scene worldwide, and also thanks to the precedents that we've set in other countries, for example, in Europe, in particular in Spain, this kind of legal intelligence has helped to transfer all that knowledge and all the arguments that the judges have provided to share it with other jurisdictions. So it's the ADF also plays an important role of sharing information, like a hub that reunites all the information around plant medicines and then share to kind of shed light into other countries.
Right. Thank you. So we have a question in the chat around someone who's working with ayahuasca microdosing. She says there's no DMT in the product, so I assume that would be vine only. So what kind of legal framework or legal lens would you look at if somebody was working with vine only ayahuasca products, whether they should be concerned about any potential legal reproduction?
Well, I think the answer there would be first, where is this person based? Because as we know, if it's only, the vine, then there's no DMT, which shouldn't be a problem. But as we know, ayahuasca, like the Psychotria viridis and the Banisteropsis capi, is scheduled in France and in Italy explicitly in the laws, and then in the Netherlands due to the Supreme Court resolution. So if you're not in those countries, I think my guess would be there should be no problem.
Okay, Great. So I think one of the pieces that's always struck me about the work that you're all doing is the emotional support. And so, having followed some of these cases, I know maybe Constanza, because you've followed some of them for years. What does the life look like for some of these folks who, even if they get off in the end from any legal charges, what happens on the emotional level or on their personal lives when people have this experience of getting arrested or having legal charges because of their work with plant medicines or because of receiving a package?
Well, I have to say, with the pass of the time, we got more used to support, to provide this moral support to people reaching out to us. That was a learning process for us as well, because we at the very beginning we tended to be very emotionally involved, and we realized that was probably not the best way to offer the best support. But I have to say that in most cases, especially at the beginning, before before we witness this increase in psychoactive plant related cases all over the world, people was shocked at the beginning because they many of them didn't realize or didn't know they were doing something that may involve a legal problem. Some of them has never been in touch with the criminal justice system at all, not even in touch with any, I don't know, let's say any reflections about drug policies, drug laws, and criminal justice in general. So one of the lessons we got from this first appreciation that I'm sharing is that we needed to offer information, a lot of information to the community for people involved somehow with the use of plants. They realized that they could face legal issues traveling with plants or doing any activities in relations to it, even if sometimes they have a traditional connection with the plants, the medicines, even if they feel or felt they were protected by the plant or the medicine, etc. So this was like a very first lesson that we needed to share, that legal issues may arise. Also, it's usually, even in for example, in the context of the Spain now, more focusing in here in the context of Spain, even if presidents were pretty successful in the sense that all the cases we have supported have been acquittals, and no prison sentence was imposed. What we saw as well is that the process of navigating a legal process, a criminal process, can be very hard in emotional terms, in economical terms, in social terms. So we have many dimensions that we have to navigate, even if the end of the process is a happy end, that of course we don't know at the very beginning. So that was another important lesson, that even if the result is a good result, the path can be challenging as well. So we are I think we are really proud that one of the as a part of the services that we provide is this kind of accompaniment with the person, with the people during this path, and what we can feel is that they are very grateful because they found a space in which they can share, and Natalia and Jesus know this very well now, much better than I, that they feel understood, they feel supported, they feel they can share their fears and their doubts and their hopes, etc., with us, and they found this safe space. And I think that's also a very important contribution that Jesus and Natalia do in their daily work and their daily life.
Constanza.
I don't
Yeah.
know, Natalia and Jesus. Yeah.
Yeah, Jesus and Natalia, do you want to add to that what it feels like to offer that support? And so I think just to make it quite clear, like our lawyers don't go into court for people. You know, we're really supporting, gathering evidence that connects the dots between different legal cases, sometimes helping people find legal representatives in their given country, and then offering this kind of accompaniment. So Jesus and Natalia, do you want to add to just what your experience has been just accompanying people through these legal processes?
Yes, of course. Natalia, go
ahead.
No, so it's always difficult when facing criminal law, right? When facing a possibility of being in prison, especially because of one's beliefs or one's practices. So knowing that, it makes us do that extra effort of being comprehensive, being supportive, not only as lawyers, because usually lawyers can be a bit cold, right? But also understanding that this practice is part of many people's beliefs, many people's ways of healing. So taking that into account, we have to be even more supportive, right? Many of the people that have been involved in criminal issues, they're usually healers, they're usually people who help other people. So it seems even more unjust to be involved in a criminal process, right? So having this in mind, we try to provide as much help as we can give. As you mentioned, we're not on the ground in every single country, and sometimes legislation and legal frameworks can be quite difficult to get a hold on. Language barrier, of course, is not is an issue, of course. So yeah, we try to get in contact with local lawyers, see how they can assist, how they can help. Also, trying to explain many of the times to these lawyers that are not familiar with many of the plant medicines, what are these plants about? What is the medicine that surrounds many of these practices around? And also tackling this myth that plants are fiscalized under international law or under local legislations. That is, of course, an interesting legal topic, but we have to go beyond that, right? Because we're talking about people, we're talking about their liberty, we're talking about exercise of the freedoms and the rights, and I think that's where the ADF brings this extra component of having a humane touch throughout all this process.
Thanks, Jesus. And Natalia.
Yes, and as Constanza was saying, there's also like kind of a trauma of a person who's facing charges for the use of these plants. And there's a article in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which states that we have the freedom of religion, thought, and consciousness. So there's also the religious aspect of all of this. As we all probably know, there are a lot of religions that have been recognized at the international level and in national legislations as well, and then they're being arbitrarily considered as sects. So this profoundly violates this freedom of religion. So just it's not only the individual trauma, of course, of all of a sudden you're just in a criminal process, which is quite hard financially, emotionally, and all the family might get an impact on that. But also there's a huge violation to the freedom of religion, thought, and consciousness. So it's quite hard, just the idea walks hand by hand also with the aspect of kind of protecting the human rights that involve the use of these plants.
Great. That segues well to one of the questions.
Can I add something to that? Yeah, just came to my mind that I agree with Jesus and Natalia that one of the learnings that we got during this process of ADF was that we were not facing just let's say, just a drug case or a criminal case, but it was more, I mean, it was the dimension of the issues we were dealing with were related to many, in many ways, with human rights, and especially with the sector of human rights, that is economic, social, and cultural rights. And just to bring an example to you, the coca leaf cases that we face, many, I would say, like, I don't know, 90% of them are happens here in Spain, and they involved people from the Andean communities, but living in Spain, and they want to continue their social use of coca leaf, and in many cases they bring the plant with them, because many times they don't even conceive that this is a prohibited plant or a prohibited use here, because from the countries they come from, it's so common, it's so normalized. I mean, it's legal, it's normalized, and it's an important part of social life. So, for example, one of the arguments that we are bringing, and we developed with time, in a more sophisticated way, was the cultural right to use a plant that you socially use in your home country or in your home society. So this is just one example of how we realized that we needed to bring these cases beyond a drug or criminal drug case, and to move or to push them in a broader scenario, incorporating many different angles of the economic, social, and cultural rights.
Stanzi, I think that addresses the question we had in the chat. Maybe I don't know if there's anything else to add about whether or not using an international human rights or cognitive liberty framework, if that is getting any traction. Is there any more you might want to say in terms of that? I know both Jesus and Natalia, your lawyers focusing specifically on human rights. Maybe starting with Jesus.
Yes. So it really it's complicated because each country has its way of interpreting international human rights conventions. This should not be the case, but unfortunately it is. Also, legislations vary a lot in each country, in each region. We see that specifically in Northern America, there is quite a protection under freedom or religious acts. But this is not the case in the rest of the countries, right? They don't have that strong freedom of consciousness and religion. And so even though the international framework is usually approved by many of the states, they do differ in how they interpret them locally. And that is a challenge. Even though internationally there is an interpretation and there is an understanding of how these rights are protected and how they're developed, locally is where we face strong challenges. Right, this margin of appreciation that the European Human Rights Court applies, well, it is in a sense an issue when discussing or when facing legal challenges locally. So, yeah, I think that would be one part of the problem of the international conventions applying it locally.
Talia, add anything?
Yeah, well, just adding that these tensions that we see with the drug control framework and the human rights framework, it's not a tension that only happens at the domestic level, but we see this also at the international level. So we see all the agencies of the United Nations of drug control that are in Vienna, that are, totally going towards a more prohibitionist strategy. And then we see all these agencies that sit in Geneva that have to do with human rights, going towards decriminalization, and allowing the personal use, for example, or in the case of indigenous persons, of course, reinforcing the rights that they have under a lot of international instruments like the ILO 169 convention. And we see this two United Nations bodies being in constant tension and not having a dialogue at all. So the kind of this international framework that is not communicating is somehow, coming into the ground at the domestic level. So it's through the human rights, actually, and the prioritization of human rights over drug control policies that we've been able to set precedents in this sense. So I think this will be kind of looking into the future, is how the domestic judges will resolve these tensions that are crystallizing in the domestic level as well.
Thank you, Natalia. I think mentioning Indigenous rights is quite important, because we know a lot of these cases are about medicines traveling out from inside their countries of origin to other countries. So, that while there are a lot of people that are not, coming from traditional communities of that use, we do have cases within the ADF where Indigenous people are being caught carrying the medicines of their peoples. Are there any cases, not knowing that we can't get into specifics, but what kind of trends, what are we seeing in this regard that may be good to share with the international community?
Well, I would say that at the moment we're facing one of the most delicate moments with the ADF, because we have 4 persons arrested in Mexico that are Indigenous persons. They have self-determined as Indigenous, and this is quite a huge violation to human rights and also constitutional law in Mexico, because, as we know, as Indigenous, they have special rights to the psychoactive plants and ancestral use of these plants. So it's not only under the domestic level, but this is totally recognized at the international level as well. So whenever it's an Indigenous person who's being detained, there's special protection that needs to be given through all the process, like special translation. There needs to be also a cultural translation of the process, and so on and so forth. And we're not seeing this. So right now it's one of the most challenging moment of Indigenous persons being, accused of drug trafficking.
And do we have a sense of why this sudden flux of cases in Mexico? Is there an understanding of what's happening there?
Well, I don't know if Jesus, you want to answer that.
Well, I think it comes from a long list of things that are not functioning correctly in the local legal system. These cases particularly are difficult because there is a figure of preventive prison that is enforced directly when we're discussing or we're talking about health issues, health crimes that are placed under this category. I think that it's mistaken by the authorities. What they portray or what they exhibit is that they're unaware of how many of these communities, many of these Indigenous peoples have used this plant medicine. And we see it also in the local legislation. Mexico has one of the, I would say, harshest legislations on this matter in the world. Unlike many other countries, Mexico, even though they have a strong and historical use, the use of peyote and the use of mushrooms in particular, they are categorized as illegal in Mexico. There is an exemption for Indigenous communities, but this exemption is just that they will not be prosecuted, but this does not mean that it's not a crime. So I think this presses on the issue that we need to continue to inform, to provide evidence, to provide information to authorities to understand what they're talking about when they put this category under many of the plant medicines.
Do you want to add anything, Natalia or Constanza? Good. We have a question also from somebody in the chat who says that they are an attorney retiring soon and they want to know how to help. How are lawyers from around the world incorporated into the work that we do, and what are the opportunities?
Well, please email us so we can explain everything in depth. We have a network of lawyers and in different countries. So one of the first things we usually do when we receive a request from someone demanding legal support is, well, we ask if, do you have a lawyer already? Because that's the very first question that we pose. And if the person doesn't have a lawyer, we connect her or him with a local lawyer that has some expertise in the matter, if possible. We don't have lawyers contacts in every country in the world, but in many, I have to say, and even in different parts of within the same countries. So our network is getting bigger. So yes, please email us, and we can explain how to be in touch, and to have your contact, basically, so we can transfer if a case in your jurisdictions comes to us. We can be in touch and try to work together. I don't know,
Yeah, the
Susan,
ADF.
if you want to add something.
Yeah.
I don't have the number of I mean, the number of lawyers that we have in our database. It's not like, let's say, it's not a formal network, but we have, for us, the work with lawyer has also been an important part of the strategy, let's say, because we try to bring them together to discuss, to make them explain the situation in their own countries, and and to develop common strategies, to provide support to each other, etc. So that's also an important part of our work, the work. The education. This is an important word in the title of ICEERS. And so from our side, we try to provide these educations to lawyers, to prosecutors, to judges, the best we can in terms of approaching these people. Is not always easy, and they tend to be very, let's say, very strict in their consideration of this type of cases. So, but with lawyers, we have been more successful, so we have to say, yeah.
Thank you, Constanza. And I think, it's this project is really, it's a community effort. It's taken a lot of different lawyers who work with us, people who spread the word, and also it's been through community funding that we've been able to do this. We've done 2 successful crowdfunders, but just spreading the word. Often the people who are facing legal challenges, they might have to be paying legal costs, they might not be able to have their own livelihood. So it's not, we don't ask people for a fee. And so if you can, or if you know anyone who can, to actually financially support the ADF, a monthly donation is a great way to go. And then we can just really continue the work and continue supporting folks. And then your community of practitioners knows that we're there for them if they have any troubles. So I think, really finding a way to donate if you can is a great way to support the program. Which leads me to another question. If somebody knows somebody who suddenly finds themselves in a legal situation, what should they do? What's the first step that's most important that people do if they find themselves, let's go to the package situation, because I think it's much more common that people have a package intercepted of medicine or receiving a package. What does that look like for people when that happens? And what can they do?
Well, I think the first step is first knowing what is the legal framework in your country. Like, the best way to attend a legal case is preventing one, for sure. So I think just being mindful that it is not maybe safe. It might be legal, but still not very safe. So I would just invite everyone to know and educate themselves first on, is it legal? Why? Is it illegal? Then why? So just attending the whys, and just knowing the legislation is something that can really help with the legal harm reduction. And then, of course, the second step is always sending an email to law@ics.org, where we can actually connect to some lawyers that have know about all these incidents, and they do have a lot of experience in the past. They literally know the arguments already. So we don't want to lose time. So at the beginning, like the first hours of a person being arrested, for example, are crucial. The judge normally has, depending where, but normally up until 48 hours to determine if there's elements to consider there's a felony. So I think these first hours are crucial. So normally, as Constanza said, we do have a database of national lawyers who we've worked with in the past. So it's touching base with us. It could be even before, and we can just give the contact of our lawyer before anything happens. But just as Constanza also mentioned, education is the first element to a legal case, and then of course just we are always there to help and to kind of provide all the expertise that we have in the field.
What happens when people are traveling with medicine or making that choice? What kind of cases do we see that involve flights and traveling with medicine or borders? So maybe you want to speak to that question.
Yes, so unfortunately, we've seen an increased number of people being detained or arrested in borders, particularly airports, bringing their medicines. And usually this is because some of the samples that the authorities use are not completely precise. So sometimes we've seen cases where people bring, for instance, peyote, and the results from customs turns out to be MDMA, right? So this is of course not precise, and that can lead to investigations, to imprisonment. And so we, for once, talk to authorities to help them create a more precise way to measure many of the substances. Also, be in contact with authorities to let them know that many of these substances are not scheduled, they're not fiscalized, and finally, just be the person who brings this. I think they have to be mindful that it's a possibility that they can get into trouble because of this. Fortunately, many of the cases just last until the investigation. We usually don't see them go above or beyond that, but we have recently seen more cases where this has not happened, where we've seen people being arrested. So just be mindful of that.
We do have a question. I'm not sure if we have the answer to it. Out of the, I think it's 283 or 4 cases we've seen over the last number of years, do we have, exact statistics on how many of those resulted in acquittals and how many resulted in convictions?
Yes, well, first of all, I just want to, point out that out of the 283 cases that we've supported, it's also kind of legal challenges, because sometimes, as I said, like the first hours are super important to determine if there's a felony or not. So I would say there's 283 legal challenges. Some of them just escalate into a formal legal case. This means there's a prosecution and there's kind of formal charges being in the process. So that's like the main difference, right? So fortunately, not all of the legal challenges escalate up to a formal legal case. So I would say that not all of them, have had a trial and a process. But from those of them who have escalated into a legal case, formally speaking, we've seen different results. So sometimes we've seen, as Constanza mentioned, there's a lot of acquittal. Then, of course, we see recognition of ayahuasca or whatever the medicine is involved not being a scheduled substance under national law. So we see also that. Then we see, for example, in the US, it's very common that judges don't want to have a stance on the legality of ayahuasca. So they normally just kind of, do a probation or community service, or sometimes it's a fine. They won't go to study the legality of ayahuasca, for example. So the results vary depending on each country. Of course, in Spain, for example, we've seen, a lot of judges recognizing that ayahuasca is illegal, but it's kind of ambivalent depending on each country.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So yeah, when people see, I think the when we say legal incidents, we don't necessarily mean a case that's gone through the court system. So just have a couple of clarifying questions. So someone just wanted to be sure that they understood that there are 4 cases currently in Mexico. Is that
Well, it's
Well,
4 cases that involve indigenous persons, but there's also other 4 persons that are not indigenous that are also
okay?
detained at the moment. So
So
it
there's
sums up.
8 people that have been
Well, it's
detained.
actually 9. It's actually 9, but only 4 are indigenous.
Wow. Okay. Someone else is asking about the 2 recent arrests in Spain. So I don't know if you want to speak to these 2 cases, one in particular where there were, quite a number of police officers sent to make an arrest, and just what those 2 cases that have become quite high profile in Spain, what can we learn about what is currently becoming a bit of an issue in Spain? Constanza, do you want to speak to that? Do you feel familiar?
Yeah, well, we don't have many details about the evolution, the current situation and evolution of these cases, but from what we have seen, I think the situation is quite worrying because it shows. First of all, I think it shows a lack of understanding from the Spanish authorities and especially the Spanish police about which is the background and the context of traditional plants use and also about the legality of these plants. So and I think, as Natalia mentioned right before, it's a bit also it's a bit a lack of understanding the connection with cults and the connections with this. I think this sensationalistic way of looking at what we don't understand, what we don't know. I have to say, this is a trend we are seeing all over Europe. It started in France a while ago, but this year Italy also scheduled ayahuasca and all the plants used to in the decoction of ayahuasca. So I think it's worrying because as authority, we have several ways of approaching an issue we don't understand, and we have doubts about the implications for public health or public security. So we can opt for establishing a dialogue with the people involved and try to learn about the phenomenon and try to focus on risk reduction and to focus on how can we approach from a political framework, from a legal framework, from a social framework, a response as a community to what we see being an emerging public security or public health issue, or taking this other option of not asking and going in this type of sensationalistic rights where from my point of view, and perhaps this is something shared from also by you, it's very disproportionate. So no matter what the end of the conclusion of these cases, the way of acting was very disproportionate, and I have to say this is very common in many drug cases. So it shows like that we need to learn a lot as society, as community. We need to learn a lot on how to, what type of response we provide to our things that happens in our communities.
Thank you, Constanza. I'm just going to go to the last. There's a couple of little small questions coming through, and then we'll hear from each of our amazing panelists, and then we'll wrap up for today. So there was another question. Just I think these two cases in Spain, or at least one of them, was the case where people were gathering, and there was an arrest. But how many have there been any cases that involve retreat centers, or how many cases actually that we know of are coming where there's a police interaction when people are actually going to a ceremony in a physical space? Do you have a sense of that? Maybe Natalia?
Yes, well, we've seen normally what the main incidents that we've supported have to do, as we said, with the importation. It's a person traveling with the medicine into the airport, then it's being tested, and then there's prosecution or not. Then there's the option of another person receiving a package home, and then it's sometimes a controlled delivery of the package with the police. And then, of course, we've seen this new situation where ceremonies are being somehow getting caught in the prohibitionist approach. So this is one of the parts which I think it's more delicate, of course, because it's as the persons who are there are also practicing the freedom of religion. And then well, this talks about how states are also implementing a more prohibitionist approach rather than just focusing on the plant medicines. They're also looking into this sect argument. So this is one of the most delicate things that we've also seen in the ADF. So this is why we were also, we started saying that the ADF is at the moment facing one of the most challenging episodes of our program, due to the need of just having an approach to each situation, which needs to be approached in a different way. So I just also want to just say to kind of finish that the ADF would kind of always worked towards the legal cases, but we've also started with a proactive approach. Let's not wait to a legal incident to happen. So let's work beforehand. So this is, we've done a lot of efforts in different countries in kind of gathering the community, having a lawyer in charge, helping the lawyer to understand the arguments, the scientific aspect, sharing all the sentences and precedents that we've said in the past, and so on and so forth. So I think that also is a lesson to us, and it should be for our community, is to start a proactive work before something happens. And this is something that we cannot do by ourselves at the ADF, but we also need to work hand by hand with the community. So this is also kind of an invitation to all our facilitators and the community in each country to get together. And we're more than happy to educate the lawyers as well, and kind of form a national organism that can actually start educating the authorities as well. So this is a calling to also work internationally, locally, and globally to face the situation, because that would also make that the ADF can actually work proactively more easily than just attending legal incidents.
Great. Yeah, and I think there's a team within ICEERS that does work with practitioners on the ground in several countries. So I think we know it's such a jurisdictional, regional focus. Everything is different where everybody is, and speaking with each other and working with your community is really important. So before we close, I just want to hear from each of you. Those who know me know I love thinking about a brighter future. And so I'm just curious if you had, one desire for the year that is coming, or the work ahead for this legal work, what would that be? How could you envision things looking differently? And I'll start with Constanza.
Well, I think as Natalia said, that we probably will need to focus on, or put more energy on the proactive strategies, especially when developments like the one happening in Italy, or now in Spain with all these raids, or also France. So we need to focus on proactive and educational and risk reduction strategies, and to deepen the dialogue with authorities. And this is of course, I don't know, but perhaps I was just an idea that came to my mind. We were in the global and in a global level, not specifically for Spain, but in the global level, we were very optimistic about the we were very optimistic about the future of the legal futures of psychoactive plants, because we were witnessing this wave of cannabis regulation all over the world. But next, or very soon, what we also saw, it's that cannabis regulation is very compatible with very repressive drug policies in other areas. So perhaps we will be facing a very complicated scenario in which cannabis is legality is more and more open, and traditional plants are getting more and more restricted. So this is something that we need to. I mean, this is a balance that we need to fight somehow. I mean, we need to work on more creative responses from the society, from civil society, as we are part of, and also to establish the dialogues with the different stakeholders to be able to promote other responses.
Thank you, Constanza. And Jesus, what would you, I know you're newer to the team, but I can tell you're a big dreamer. So what would you like to see for the future?
Well, I would like to see a lot of things, but I think the first one, and I think the most important one, has to do with the community. I think as many of these plant medicines are becoming increasingly popular or accessible to many people around the globe, we need to be, first of all, conscious of the communities where these plants come from. We've seen a trend regarding, trying to generate patents around many of these plant medicines. I think that's something as a community we need to be really respectful of indigenous knowledge and their systems and their ecosystems. I also believe that we have the situation that's going on around Europe and around the globe, criminalizing many of these practices. We mentioned the cases in Spain, but we've also seen cases around raids in Italy and in other places. I think that is also a wake-up call for our community to have more ethical and more responsible practices. At the end of the day, these practices are going to be our presentation towards the authorities, stakeholders. So we have to be really responsible on that. And I think in that sense, when we do have this sense of community, a sense of responsibility, we're going to have a stronger stance against governments placing many of these restrictions on plant medicine.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jesus. And Natalia, what's your vision?
Well, I think that there's a calling, collective calling, which is that we need to be activists for what we stand for. What do we stand for? And I think that it's also a great opportunity, that there's a lot of, challenges right now, legal challenges in different parts of the world, but that's also an opportunity to kind of coming together, looking into what are the practices that we are sharing, like what's the best practices that we can envision together. And we need to stand strictly together on that. So that's a calling for the best practices also. And very important, reciprocity. So we see there's the Western world finding a lot of healing and kind of solutions in the use of these ancestral plants, which are a gift. But of course, we are obliged to preserve the Amazon region in particular. In each plant has its own bioculture. But speaking specifically about ayahuasca, it's not only I want to facilitate it, do not want to have a legal challenge. It's what are you giving back to the source from? It's very delicate what's going on. So I think it's a calling for activism, but that involves reciprocity, integrity in the practices that we are sharing. And of course, I think the ideal model is self-regulation. So we don't want the government to come and tell us how to regulate, but we need to self-regulate as a community. So it's also a calling for being activists of our own circles, of our own communities, and sharing those practices with other countries. It can inspire to have the best practices, and bringing the reforestation that needs to be brought to the Amazon region.
Thank you, Natalia. I think that's a great place to end. That, we talked about human rights, but rights come with responsibilities. Responsibilities to acknowledge the sources of these medicines, to uphold the rights of the people and the places and the territories where they're coming from, to not deplete the plant medicines, fungi, cacti, toad, for use in other places without really considering that. So, the ADF is really, as I see it, it's one prong in a multi-pronged approach that comes out of ICEERS. And I really thank everybody for coming here today. Thank Natalia, you're calling to be activists. So, we also need to just call on the community to support the work that we're doing. If you're able to, please contribute to our work or share the word that, we're able to do this work because of donations from the communities. And we're really happy to be here to answer your questions today. So stay healthy, stay safe, and please stay in touch. Thank you, Constanza, Natalia, Jesus, for your incredible work supporting the community, and to everyone for being here with us today. And farewell.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
And thank you, Sarah.